If you want Muslims not to wear the hijab, either you do it by law, like France, and you upset the population and attract human rights condemnations, or you make it so insignificant that nobody will feel the need to wear the hijab anymore, like in the UK, in the US. So, how did they do it? Hello and welcome, my name is William. I am a researcher in Sociology at the University of Warwick in the UK, and this is a series about my latest book, Muslims in the Neoliberal Empire. In this video, we will explore two things. First, how counter-extremism strategies have reduced the hijab to a fashion statement and Islam to an identity label. And second, how have some Muslims come to collaborate with the government to denounce, silence and arrest other Muslims. This is Chapter 2, Faithfolk and Kinfolk. Those who share the same faith will not necessarily support you. Let's go back in time to 9/11 and 7/7. The day Muslims became the enemy. Well, it started with the Crusades, then the colonization, the Cold War, but it is 9/11 that shaped the main global modern policies against Muslims. In the aftermath of 9/11, media scrutiny on Muslims increased disproportionately to the point where terror attacks by Muslims received 357% more press attention than attacks by non-Muslims. Although Muslim attacks in Western countries only accounted for 0.5% of all attacks. The scrutiny led to overwhelmingly long-lasting perceptions in the public consciousness of Muslims are terrorists, Islam being a religion of violence, and Muslims being suspects by default. The UK and the US passed some new terrorism laws giving the police greater powers. We saw stop and search, house raids, and two major policies, PREVENT and CVE. The two main instruments of the war on terror. In the UK, PREVENT was about preventing Muslims from committing violence by predicting which Muslims would likely commit terrorist acts. Its motto was "Prevention is better than the cure." Since then, everyone who works in the public sector has a prevent duty. If anyone shows certain signs, certain red flags, like starting to pray 5 times a day, dress modestly, even though these are basic practices of Islam, they would need to be reported. This was according to official police guidelines. While these policies are labeled as counter-extremism or counter-terrorism, many took issue with the fact that in practice, these policies were targeting innocent civilians with the aim of policing the public presence and visibility of Muslims. In my fieldwork, I've met and interviewed many people who were very far from sympathizing with any extremism organization, who were denied jobs in the public sector or put on no-fly list just because they were flagged. And sometimes these people were flagged by fellow Muslims because they were either business competitors or followed the wrong school of thought. That's one way the system was abused. Now, another proof that PREVENT is about social control is that environmentalist organizations have been added to the list of extremist organizations. This led to numerous people being arrested and house raided with no evidence, only suspicion. PREVENT and other policies also relied on information gathering. The FBI in the US and the police used informants. They hired Muslims, especially white converts or people who pretend to be Muslims, to spy on other Muslims. But why would Muslims spy on their own community? In previous videos, I talk about how the lack of financial stability, media visibility and political representation put some Muslims in survival mode, who were then ready to do anything for gaining an atom of these.
You do it to your own kind.
What's the threat? We all sell out every day. Might as well be on the winning team.
PREVENT would make them an offer they can't refuse. Imagine you run a Muslim private school struggling for money. How can you say no to a £50,000 envelope to collaborate and spy on your own staff members and students? This phenomenon is called ethical poverty. It's when people can't afford to hold to their moral standards because they need the money and they can't afford an alternative. Suhaima Manzoor Khan in an article mentioned that Muslims need to get out of this scarcity mindset. There is a power in saying no, she argues, especially if Muslims believe that God will provide their sustenance. Scarcity mindset is a trap used as one of the many colonial tools of power to keep people under control. It works on minorities, but also any other people who are not in power, like the working class. Prevent seemed such a good idea that China sought training from the British and uses Prevent strategies to repress Muslims. The problem is that predictive crime doesn't really work. A few cities like Los Angeles tried it, but it's impossible to successfully predict crime. As a result, these strategies were abandoned not because they were unethical, but because they were counterproductive, wasting resources, and potentially raise human rights issues at international courts of justice. A few organizations, among others, have been vocal criticizing these issues, like CAGE or Prevent Watch. These organizations, voluntarily and very often unpaid, provide support to those denied due process regarding terrorism offenses. They document miscarriages of justice, and CAGE was among the leading organizations which worked on publicizing the names of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay and played a crucial role in proving UK complicity in US imprisonment and torture in several locations, and help detainees seeking admission and compensation from the UK government. They are proof that governments can be held accountable when they are being unjust. But there is one threat that goes beyond the power of CAGE and other organizations: the Islamophobia industry. 9/11 and 7/7 coincided with the birth of the Islamophobia industry. Funders, businesses, media outlets, universities, politicians, companies who have invested millions for spreading anti-Islam and anti-Muslim narratives. But things are not black and white. Governments make the distinction between good Muslims and bad Muslims. Which Muslims the government should work with and which to avoid. These guidelines came from the think tank RAND Corporation. The RAND report stated that governments should favor liberals, progressives, some Sufis, who were enjoying a degree of financial stability and, more importantly, who were less likely to oppose the government or make any waves. It created a hierarchy of Muslims. If you're rich, famous, powerful, and you don't mind being silent on issues like Palestine, you're one of us. But if you're too religious, too poor, you don't agree with US policies, you are the enemy. If you were vocal, promoting peace in the Middle East, you would be labeled anti-Semitic and supporting a terror group. One example is how Amina Khan resigned from L'Oreal after people found tweets in support of Palestine. But this hierarchy of Muslims is nothing new. It comes from British colonial times in Nigeria. In the 19th century, the British Empire already sought to control populations by pitting one part of the population against another and openly favoring those who were less likely to stick to their religion and likely to collaborate with the empire. As a fun experiment, I've created a test that you can try yourself to figure out whether you're a good or a bad Muslim according to these criteria. However, this narrative is only the tip of the iceberg. In the era of social media, governments have realized that people were much more easy to manipulate than they thought. The Islamophobia industry resulted in the creation of fake Muslim charities and media outlets pretending to be Muslim, but controlled by think tanks and governments, with not a single Muslim working for them. This is a form of social engineering called astroturfing. These organizations were exposed and shortly after closed down. This was possible through the awareness spread by various networks, organizations like MEND monitoring acts of Islamophobia and campaigning against it, or media outlets like 5 Pillars. However, now the industry has found another strategy, especially with the influence of social media. Select very specific Muslim influencers, put them as role models, and let them do the job. In the media in 2018, the BBC used presenter Mehrin Beg as a native informant, hosting a program titled Lost Boys: What's Going Wrong for Asian Men. It was telling the public, look, I am a Muslim Asian woman and I'm saying myself that Asian men are harmful. In the era of social media, your favorite influencer might not get money only from fashion brands and productivity apps, but from a government or think tanks. In 2016, the counter-extremism think tank ISD partnered with YouTube Creators for Change to create the program Be Internet Citizens, promoting select influencers from minoritized demographics to, I quote, teach teenagers about media literacy, critical thinking, and digital citizenship. Influencers naturally paid in counter-extremism money. In some cases, governments and think tanks made deals with tech companies to control, surveil, and monitor people. In 2018, the ISD again used Facebook Messenger in a project funded by Facebook to spot and intervene in private conversations where the subjects were suspected to be at risk of extremism. But the cooperation of tech giants with counter-extremism in order to monitor minorities is nothing really new. Google was a key partner for initiatives like Imams Online. The company Moonshot CVE has been using Google Analytics to detect online suspicious activities related to religious extremism. The company Dataminer has been used to monitor Black Lives Matter protests with the help of Twitter. In summary, it is the joint effects of the criminalization of religiosity, barriers in the job market, but also the unnatural selection of Muslim role models and the blind following of consumerist and neoliberal trends, amongst other things, that rendered things like the hijab insignificant, a fashion accessory that can be worn and taken off depending on the mood, and have rendered Islam nothing more than a cultural label. Of course, lots of women still wear the hijab and believe in its meaning. Lots of people understand Islam not as a culture, but as a framework for life. But because of these external forces and Muslims put in survival mode, they are less and less. And it doesn't stop here. In the next video, we'll talk about how this new Muslim elite, influencers and Muslim private clubs reserved to those famous rich and powerful, are engineering Muslims ready to collaborate with colonial powers. To hear more about this book journey and the topic it covers, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. And if you want to dive deeper, I'm organizing online sessions. Thank you very much for your attention, and as always, take care of yourselves and each other.